The title of this talk is The Power of the Resurrection. And in the third chapter of Philippians, Paul is pouring out his heart to that church in Philippi. He's actually praying for himself and praying for all of us. And he says this amazing thing. He says, I pray to know the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of his sufferings. That somehow those two are related. Now, I want to stand back just a minute and talk about this last octave. I want to talk about the power of the resurrection that we saw from March 31st, Easter, to yesterday, April 8th, the Feast of the Annunciation. 8 days. That was an octave right there. Did it surprise you that we celebrated the Feast of the Annunciation yesterday? Was that what? Well, you know, it's normally March 25th. Did you know that? It's because the whole idea is that the angel Gabriel announced that Mary would conceive. So we regard that as when God became man and was conceived in Mary by the power of the Holy Spirit. And 9 months later, Christ is born. Well, 9 months back from December 25th, 1225, what would be that date? It would be March 25, right? 3/25 to 12/25. That's the night. That's why it's always on the 25th of March, except when it isn't. So why wasn't it on March 25th this year? Well, March 25th was Palm Sunday. So that day is already reserved as a holy day. And then we had Holy Week. So we're looking for a day to celebrate the Feast of the Annunciation that isn't already claimed and celebrated in the life of the church. So there was the whole week of Holy Week, and then following Easter is the octave of Easter. You know, have you ever wondered why we celebrate an octave of Easter? You know, nearly every other feast celebration is a one-day event. The ancient church realized what a huge thing happened in this resurrection. And they said, it's just not possible to sufficiently celebrate this in one day. We need 8 days. And so the tradition of the church has been, we celebrate an octave of Easter. So that meant that the next free day that wasn't already celebrated in the church was yesterday, April 8th. I want to put this in a context. Saturday night, Sunday, and Monday morning, what did we have? We had a mighty rushing wind flowing through this town, blowing through this town. It blew off the top third of one of my trees in my yard. People couldn't sleep through the night. We had a mighty rushing wind. We had the celebration of the divine mercy yesterday. Sunday. And then yesterday, Monday, the Feast of the Annunciation. What did we have? We had a sign and wonder in the sky with the eclipse of the sun. All of heaven and all of earth is declaring the glory of God. You know, it says in, I think it's Matthew, I think it's chapter 11, where Jesus tells these parables. They're kind of obscure, right? I mean, some of them, disciples have to take Jesus aside and say, okay, that one, sobre mi cabeza, I don't understand this one at all. And like the parable of the sower and the seeds. And they asked Jesus why he did that. He said, well, so the hard-hearted won't understand. Why would he say that? It's because is when God reveals his truth to us and we receive it and understand it, we become accountable for that. We're given both the power and the authority to walk in that revelation. Jesus, in his mercy, was revealing to the hungry who were ready to hear and ready to be accountable and ready to move and act on his word. So in Matthew, he says, "He who has ears, let him hear." The reason I'm bringing that up is this. Much of the world has no idea what's happening right now. That there are very signs, rushing wind on the earth, and signs in the heavens, all pointing to the glory and wonder and majesty of the risen Christ. So we began that octave March 31st to April 8th. The bookends were March 31st was the resurrection, when Jesus defeated sin and death. And April 8th said, remember the way I did that. I became a man. The Feast of the Assumption, remember, I became a man. I took on all the stuff that we, in our human frailty, we couldn't carry. And he took all that sin, all that suffering, all that failure, and he took it all to the cross. You realize that he died for all of humanity that ever will be. That was the weight of suffering on him. That's the weight of the sin he took. So his work is finished. He's seated at the right hand of God. And he sat down because his work is done. There isn't anything he didn't anticipate. He's not the problems that you and I are going through right now. He's not sitting next to the Father and said, "Oh, I wish I'd thought of that. Wish I'd have covered that with my blood. Why didn't I think?" He's not doing that, right? He's covered it all with his blood. The power of the resurrection. The power of the resurrection. Do you realize how important this resurrection is? Do you realize that without the resurrection, Christianity is reduced to another appealing philosophy? When you think of all the other philosophies and religions outside of Christianity, they're all the product of human beings' imagination and hopes and dreams. But you realize what the resurrection did? The resurrection is God the Father's stamp and said, "Yep, everything Jesus said is right." It's like his stamp that said, yes, everything he spoke of, that's the truth. And I'm validating that, and I'm vindicating every word that my son said with something completely beyond his own ability. Do you know that Jesus did not raise himself from the dead? Do you realize what an astounding act of trust in the Father that is? Jesus, as a mortal man, capable of being tempted in every way we were without sin. So he struggled with all the temptations you and I struggle with. And when he went to Jerusalem to face the Pharisees and to face the powers of the day, you get just a hint of what he was going through. It says he set his face like flint. Can you imagine how hard that was for him when Peter said, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And they pipe up, "Well, some think you're John the Baptist come back." And which was a little scary. I mean, well, at least I think that's hilarious. They think that was John the Baptist that came back. And some think you're Elijah, and some thinks you're just one of the prophets. And Jesus says, "So who do you say that I am?" And Peter, our beloved Peter, who puts his foot in it just like you and I do so many times, he says, you are the Christ. You are the Son of the living God. And you know what Jesus says? He congratulates Peter. He says, Peter, that's not your wisdom. You heard from the Father. You heard correctly. You heard well. You know, it's not that he's dismissing, oh, Peter, that's not you. No, he said, Peter, you're hearing well. That came from the Father. Well done. So Peter's on a roll, right? He says, so Jesus starts to talk now about how he's going to have to go and bear the sins of all mankind and suffer in death, suffer a cruel death, and then he'll rise on the third day. And Peter's pretty pleased with himself. He said, okay, got it. Jesus, if you like that one, I got another one for you. What you're talking about there, that's a terrible idea. That's a horrible idea. Don't do that. So Jesus is already in his he never stopped being God. But remember, Philippians says he emptied himself, taking the form of a man, even the form of a servant, and suffered death, even death on a cross. So he's carrying all this in his humanity. Face set like flint on the way to Jerusalem. And Peter says, no, bad idea, don't do that. And that's sort of the passion that you hear in Jesus' voice because he's dealing with this himself, right? He's tempted in every way we are. He knows the agony he's about to go to. So he has to speak strongly. He says, get thee behind me, Satan. You are not thinking as human beings do. You're not thinking as God thinks. You're thinking as human beings think. The power of the resurrection is, with Christ raised from the dead, having sent the comfort of the Holy Spirit, living in you, Holy Spirit now informing you. For 2 Corinthians says, Holy Spirit lives in you and searches out the deep things of God and reveals them to you. And then the next few verses later it says, for you have the mind of Christ. But without that, without Holy Spirit, Jesus living in us, Jesus says, get thee behind me, Satan. You are not thinking as God thinks, you're thinking as human beings think. The point is this. Without this born-again experience of Holy Spirit, we received Holy Spirit at our baptism. We received power of Holy Spirit at our confirmation. Many of us have been through Life in the Spirit seminars and received the baptism of the Holy Spirit. Without Holy Spirit, the default for human logic and human reasoning is easy prey to the evil one. Get thee behind me, Satan, because you're thinking as a human thinks, not as God thinks. The power of the resurrection. The power of the resurrection is now Holy Spirit lives in you and lives in me. And he wants out. So in the nicest possible way, he wants out. He wants us to preach in all boldness. That's one. Boy, what you read, Deacon, where did Deacon go?
I don't know.
It's his night off. There he is. Yeah. Yeah. He says, Peter's prayer is, Lord, you know that thing that got me in trouble, that got me arrested, that boldness thing that got me in trouble? Give me more of that. Give me more of that boldness, Lord. So that by the preaching of the gospel and the declaration of your servant Jesus, the testimony of Jesus, God, you will move in miracles, in healing and miracle signs and wonders. Do you see that there's the linkage between the bold declaration of the gospel and the release of miracle signs and wonders? Earlier in Matthew, Jesus says, go. It's 3 steps. Go. Wherever you go, preach the gospel. And as you go, heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out demons. That's the power of Holy Spirit living in you. That's what we're called to do. Can I take just a few more minutes? I'll take that as a yes. Okay. So, I want to talk a little bit about Mary Magdalene. I'm just captivated by this amazing daughter of God. You know, maybe we've talked a little bit about it, but for at least 6 months, maybe a year prior to his crucifixion, Jesus has been telling his disciples and the women traveling with him what the Son of Man has to do. He must lay down his life. He must suffer and carry the sins of mankind and then be raised from the dead. But if you read Mark, near the end of the Gospel of Mark, an amazing thing happens. They are all overcome by grief. They're all suffering. They're all in terrible despair and sorrow. Remember, I pray that you would know the power of the resurrection and the fellowship of his sufferings. There's a linkage there between those. So right now, we see the disciples, we see the women traveling with Jesus. They're in that place of despair and suffering. But I want to offer you this idea. Suffering, sorrow, despair, fear. All of those things will lead us in one of two directions. For the disciples, that suffering and despair and sorrow drove them into unbelief. So much so, you see in the Gospel of Mark, even when Mary runs to tell them that Jesus is risen and she's seen him, they will not believe her. On that same day, there's the two disciples on the road to Emmaus. Do you remember this story? And Christ appears to them. And they walk along, and as they walk, Jesus unpacks the scriptures, all the places that he's revealed in all the Old Testament writings. And later, the two disciples said, "Didn't our hearts burn within us as he opened the scriptures to us?" And then he was revealed where? In the breaking of the bread. And they knew it was him. They were so struck, so transformed, that even though it was the end of a long, hard day, 8 miles away, they get up and they run back to Jerusalem. They go to see the disciples. The disciples won't believe them either. And when Jesus finally does come back to them, you realize that he actually rebukes them for their unbelief. Sorrow, disappointment, loss, criticism, betrayal. Those are the four things that we have to learn how to navigate in our Christian life. Disappointment, loss, criticism, and betrayal. What we do in those circumstances means everything. It will either drive us into unbelief like the disciples, or it will lead you to the last place you saw Jesus. That's what Mary Magdalene did. She was the only one who went to the tomb, the only one. Where did she go? In her sorrow, her loss, her disappointment, she went to the last place she saw Jesus. And what happened? It was an outpouring of her love for this man who freed her from 7 demons. You remember what Jesus is doing at this time? The scriptures say that he went down into the netherworld and he brought out the captives. He led captivity captive. The tradition in the Old Testament was that when a righteous person died, he went to the bosom of Abraham. She went to the bosom of Abraham. It wasn't heaven. It was the place to wait, because heaven, the resurrection is not available until Christ's resurrection. Christ goes to this netherworld. He frees the captive. He actually goes to hell, and he gets back the keys to the kingdom that Adam and Eve had given to the evil one. Wouldn't you love to see the video of that? Jesus walking into hell, he says, "Give me back those keys." And he grabs the keys and he releases the captives from the bosom of Abraham. He rises up from the dead, bringing all these that had gone before. You look at Hebrews 11. The whole Hebrews 11 is a great litany of all the saints that died believing the promise that Christ would come. If Sarah and Abraham are there, they're all there. He's leading all of these who died in the hope. The proof of that is that it says in the scriptures that people in Jerusalem saw the dead walking around the town, right? Do you remember this part? Is it there? So here's according to Jim, here's what happened. It says, "Give me back those keys." He leads captivity captive. He brings them out. And as he's rising, he hears Mary pouring out her love for her master, who rescued her from a horrible hell on earth life. Jesus, who is love, he is irresistibly drawn to your love. So imagine, he's got all the soon-to-be saints in tow. He sees Mary. We're back to the to Revelation according to Jimmy. So he says he sees Mary at the tomb. There's hundreds, maybe thousands, maybe tens of thousands with him. He sees Mary. He says, "Wait right here. I'll be right back." And so don't you imagine David nudging Solomon and saying, "Well, it looks like he's going to be around. Let's see some sights. Let's walk around. Let's see what's going on in our old hometown." You probably won't find this in the gospel, will you? Okay, all right. So enter into my my sanctified imagination. So he goes, he's irresistibly drawn to Mary. When you and I are going through suffering and loss, disappointment, loss, criticism, betrayal, we get to choose. We can go into unbelief, as the disciples did, or we can do what Mary Magdalene did. She went to the last place that she saw Jesus, and she poured out her love for him. And Jesus found her absolutely irresistible. He's on a mission. He says, don't cling to me. I just stopped here for a sec. I got to get all these guys home. I'm on my way to heaven. Don't cling to me because I haven't ascended yet. In the middle of his mission, he is irresistibly drawn to this outpouring of Mary's love. So, for you and for me, when we're going through our times of weeping at the last place we saw Jesus, that's the right choice. That's the power of testimony. She went to the last place she saw Jesus. Jesus could not resist her and stopped the whole procession to come comfort this beloved one who loved him so well. That's the invitation for you and me. The power of the resurrection is when you cry out to Jesus, he will come. He will bring you that healing. He will bring you that resurrection. He will bring you that victory. He will restore your hope. He will lift you up out of the slimy pit and put your feet on solid rock. That's the power of the resurrection. So tonight, as we break into a chance to pray with and for each other, maybe we'll get in pairs. Maybe we'll get in, Brian and T will lead us. But maybe before we begin praying over each other, what if we shared, where was the last time you saw Jesus? Where did he come and meet you? That power of the testimony. Where did he come and make himself real and present and known and lift you up out of that pit and put your feet on solid rock? God bless you guys.
Thank you for watching our video. Please pray for our ministry. If you feel moved to donate, please go to our website intercessorsofthetrinity.org. Look for the donate button or mailing address.